The snow fell like frozen tears over Manhattan that Christmas Eve, each flake catching the amber glow of streetlights before disappearing into the darkness below. Marcus Chen pulled his Mercedes to a stop behind his corporate headquarters, the 40-story glass tower that bore his name in sleek silver letters. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the wipers sweep away the gathering snow. Another Christmas Eve alone, with just him and his son Oliver waiting at home. He checked his watch, 8:47 p.m. The boy would already be asleep, disappointed once again that his father had missed bedtime stories. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settling over his shoulders like a heavy coat he could never quite shake off. He stepped out into the biting cold, his Italian leather shoes crunching against the fresh powder. The back alley behind his building was dimly lit, shadows dancing between the dumpsters and loading docks. He had parked here to avoid the media cameras at the front entrance. Another merger announcement had made headlines that morning, and reporters had been circling like vultures all day. As he walked toward the service entrance, fumbling for his security card, a small sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable. A child's cough, weak and rattling. Marcus froze, his breath forming, clouds in the frigid air as he scanned the alley. There, nestled between two overflowing dumpsters, he saw something that made his heart stop. A tiny figure, no bigger than a crumpled garbage bag, lay curled on a bed of flattened cardboard boxes and torn newspapers. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She wore a thin jacket 3 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled up, multiple times but still covering her small hands completely. Her dark hair was matted against her pale face, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that sent alarm bells ringing through Marcus's mind. Around her neck was wrapped what looked like an old dish towel, a pathetic attempt at a scarf. One of her shoes was missing entirely, and the remaining one was held together with duct tape. She was shivering violently, her small body convulsing with each breath. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his expensive coat immediately forgotten, as he shrugged it off and wrapped it around the child. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" he said softly, his voice catching in his throat. The girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises clouded with exhaustion and fever. "Please," she whispered, her voice so faint Marcus had to lean closer to hear. "I need to find my daddy. He works in the tall building with all the lights, the one that touches the clouds." She tried to point, but her arm fell limply back to her side. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he realized she was pointing at his building. "What's your daddy's name, sweetheart?" he asked while pulling out his phone to call 911. The girl's eyes were already closing again. "Chen," she murmured. "Daddy, Marcus Chen. The security man at the door said he wasn't there, said I was lying, said to go away." The phone slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, clattering, onto the icy pavement. His mind reeled, unable to process what he had just heard. It wasn't possible. He didn't have a daughter, only Oliver, only his son from his marriage to Rebecca, who had passed away 3 years ago from cancer. This had to be some mistake, some coincidence. But as he looked closer at the child's face, his world tilted on its axis. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her nose, even the small birthmark near her left ear, they were all achingly familiar. They were his features, reflected in miniature. His hands shook as he scooped the girl into his arms, her weight frighteningly light against his chest. "What's your name?" he asked, though somewhere deep in his bones, he already knew the answer would change everything. "Sophie," she breathed against his shoulder. "Sophie Chen. Mommy said you didn't know about me, said you were too important. But she got sick and couldn't wake up anymore. I had nowhere else to go." Marcus's legs nearly gave out beneath him as memories came flooding back. A brief relationship 7 years ago with Grace, a struggling artist who had vanished from his life without explanation. She had simply disappeared one day, leaving only a note saying she couldn't live in his world of board meetings and society galas. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours to Marcus. The paramedics worked swiftly, wrapping Sophie in thermal blankets and checking her vitals. "Severe hypothermia," one of them said grimly. "She needs immediate treatment. You're her father?" The question hung in the air like the snowflakes swirling around them. Marcus nodded, the lie coming easier than the truth he wasn't ready to face. "Yes," he said, "I'm her father." As they loaded Sophie into the ambulance, Marcus climbed in beside her, his hand finding her small cold fingers. She squeezed back, weakly, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. Whether she was truly his daughter or not, this child had sought him out in her darkest hour. She had slept on garbage and endured the freezing cold just to find him. The least he could do was be there for her now. The hospital corridors blurred, past as they rushed Sophie into the emergency room. Marcus found himself pacing the waiting area, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. He called his assistant, instructing her to find any information about Grace Lynn, the artist he had dated years ago. Within an hour, the devastating truth began to unfold. Grace had died 2 weeks ago in a charity hospital in Brooklyn, succumbing to pneumonia after months of battling illness without insurance. The hospital records showed she had listed no next of kin except for a daughter, Sophie, age 6. The birth certificate his assistant managed to obtain listed the father as unknown, but the dates aligned perfectly with when Marcus and Grace had been together. The social worker at the hospital confirmed that Sophie had disappeared from the children's ward the day after her mother's death, leaving only a note saying she was going to find her father. Dr. Patricia Williams emerged from the emergency room. 3 hours later, her expression grave but hopeful. "She's stable," she said, and Marcus felt his knees weaken with relief. "The hypothermia was severe, and she's malnourished and dehydrated. She's been living on the streets for almost 2 weeks, from what we can tell. But she's a fighter." She kept talking about finding her daddy, about how her mommy promised he would take care of her if anything happened. Marcus's eyes burned with tears he hadn't shed since Rebecca's funeral. "Can I see her?" he asked. Dr. Williams nodded and led him to a room where Sophie lay sleeping, looking impossibly small in the hospital bed. Machines beeped softly around her, monitoring her recovery. Her face had regained some color, and her breathing was steady. Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed and took her hand again, marveling at how perfectly it fit inside his own. Sophie woke just as the first light of Christmas morning painted the hospital room in soft gold. Her eyes found Marcus immediately, widening with a mixture of recognition and uncertainty. "You stayed," she whispered as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Of course I stayed," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." Sophie studied his face intently. "Mommy showed me your picture from a newspaper. She said you build tall buildings that touch the sky. She said you were too busy for us, but that you were a good man. She said if anything happened to her, I should find you and tell you the truth." Marcus leaned forward, his heart hammering. "What truth, Sophie?" The little girl's eyes filled with tears. "That she loved you. That she left because she didn't want to trap you. She found out about me after she went away. She said you had important things to do and a baby would have ruined everything. But she got sick, and there was no one else. I'm sorry I came to find you. I know you don't want me." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. All these years, Grace had raised their daughter alone, struggling in poverty while he lived in penthouses and flew in private jets. She had protected him from a responsibility she thought he wouldn't want, sacrificing everything to give him the freedom she believed he valued more than family. "Sophie," he said, taking both her small hands in his, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mommy was wrong about one thing. I would have wanted you. I would have wanted both of you. I didn't know you existed, but now that I do, you're the most important thing in my world. You're my daughter, and I'm going to take care of you. I promise." Sophie's lower lip trembled. "But what if you change your mind? What if I'm too much trouble? I don't know how to live in a big house or eat fancy food or talk to important people." Marcus moved to sit on the edge of the bed, gathering Sophie carefully into his arms. She stiffened at first, unused to affection from anyone but her mother, then slowly melted against him. "You know what?" he said softly. "I don't know how to be a dad to a little girl. I only have a son, Oliver, who's 9. I don't know anything about braiding hair or picking out dresses or whatever else dads of daughters are supposed to know, but maybe we can figure it out together. And Oliver, he's always wanted a sibling. He's going to be so excited to meet you." Sophie pulled back to look at him, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. "I have a brother?" she asked wonderingly. Marcus nodded, smiling through his tears. "You have a brother, and a home, and you'll never have to sleep outside again. I promise you that." The next few days passed in a blur of legal documentation, DNA tests that confirmed what Marcus's heart already knew, and preparations to bring Sophie home. Oliver, when told about his sister, had reacted with the pure joy only a child could muster. He immediately began planning all the things he would teach her, from riding a bike to playing video games. He spent Christmas Day at the hospital, reading stories to Sophie and showing her pictures of their house, her new room, and the family dog, Buster, who he assured her gave the best cuddles in the world. The household staff, who had watched Marcus struggle with grief and loneliness since Rebecca's death, welcomed the news of Sophie with warm enthusiasm. The cook, Mrs. Chen, no relation, immediately began planning nutritious meals to help Sophie regain her strength. The housekeeper prepared a room fit for a princess, though Marcus insisted on letting Sophie choose her own decorations once she was well enough. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Sophie had been traumatized by her weeks on the streets and her mother's death. She woke screaming from nightmares, calling for grace. She hoarded food in her room, unable to believe there would always be more. She flinched when anyone moved, too quickly, and went silent for hours at a time, retreating into herself in a way that broke Marcus's heart. The child psychologist explained that it would take time, patience, and consistent love to help Sophie heal from her trauma. Marcus rearranged his entire life, stepping back from day-to-day operations at his company to focus on his children. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, fumbling with Sophie's dark strands until she giggled at his clumsy attempts. He sat with her through the nightmares, holding her until she remembered where she was and that she was safe. One evening, about a month after bringing Sophie home, Marcus found her in his study, staring at a framed photograph on his desk. It was of him with Rebecca and Oliver, taken just months before Rebecca got sick. Sophie traced the glass with one small finger, her expression unreadable. "She was beautiful," Sophie said quietly. "Oliver's mommy." Marcus knelt beside her. "She was," he agreed, "and she would have loved you." Sophie turned to him, her eyes serious beyond her years. "Do you miss her?" she asked. Marcus considered lying, giving her a simple answer, but Sophie deserved honesty. "Every day," he said. "But missing her doesn't mean I love you or Oliver any less. Love isn't like money in a bank account. You don't run out. The more people you love, the more love you have to give." Sophie nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled photograph. It was of Grace, smiling and holding a baby Sophie. "This is all I have of Mommy," she said, her voice wobbling. "I was afraid if I showed you, you might be mad that she kept me secret." Marcus took the photo gently, studying Grace's face. She looked tired but happy, her love for Sophie evident in every line of her expression. "I'm not mad," he said truthfully. "Your mommy did what she thought was best. She loved you enough to raise you alone when things got hard. And she loved you enough to make sure you knew how to find me when she couldn't take care of you anymore. That takes incredible courage. He stood and walked to his desk, pulling out an empty photo album. "How about we make this your special book? We can put your mommy's picture in here and add new ones as we make new memories. That way, you'll always have your past and your present together." Sophie's face lit up with the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. "Can we put one of you and me and Oliver in there too?" she asked hopefully. "As many as you want," Marcus promised. That night, for the first time, Sophie called him Daddy without prompting. The word was tentative, testing, but it filled Marcus's chest with warmth he hadn't felt in years. Oliver, who had been watching from the doorway, ran in and announced that they needed a group hug immediately. As Marcus held both his children, he thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. If he hadn't worked late that Christmas Eve, if he hadn't parked in that particular alley, if Sophie hadn't been brave enough to search for him, they might never have found each other. Spring came slowly to New York that year, but when it did, it brought with it a sense of renewal that seemed to touch everything in the Chen household. Sophie had grown 2 inches and gained 15 pounds, her cheeks now rosy with health. She and Oliver had become inseparable, with Oliver taking his big brother duties seriously. He walked her to her classroom every morning and was waiting outside when school ended. Sophie, in turn, helped Oliver with his art projects, having inherited her mother's creative talents. Marcus had found a grief counselor who specialized in helping children process loss, and slowly Sophie began to talk about Grace without dissolving into tears. She shared stories of their life together, the tiny apartment where they'd lived, the way Grace would sing her to sleep, the games they'd play when there wasn't money for toys. On Mother's Day, Marcus took both children to Grace's grave for the first time. It was a simple headstone in a city cemetery, marked only with her name and dates. Marcus had offered to have her moved to a nicer location, but Sophie had shaken her head firmly. "Mommy liked simple things," she said. "She wouldn't want a fancy grave. She'd want flowers." So they brought flowers, wild flowers that Sophie picked herself, and sat on a blanket beside the grave while Sophie told her mother about her new life. She talked about her room, painted purple at her request, about Buster the dog who slept on her bed every night, about Mrs. Chen's cookies and Oliver's terrible jokes. She talked about Marcus, how he read to her every night and had learned to French braid, and never got mad when she had bad dreams. "I think she knows," Sophie said finally, arranging the flowers carefully against the headstone. "I think Mommy knows I'm okay now." Marcus put his arm around her shoulders and Oliver took her hand. "She knows," Marcus said softly, "and she's proud of you for being so brave." They sat there for a while longer, 3 people who had found each other through loss and pain, but who had built something beautiful from the ashes of their grief. As they walked back to the car, Sophie suddenly stopped and looked up at Marcus. "Daddy," she said, "I want to do something for other kids, like me, kids who don't have anywhere to go." Marcus knelt down to her level, seeing Grace's compassion shining through their daughter's eyes. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. Sophie bit her lip, thinking hard. "Maybe we could make a place where kids could go if they're lost or scared. Somewhere warm with food and people who care. Mommy always said that everyone deserves to be loved, even if they don't have money or nice clothes." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. At 6 years old, Sophie understood something that many adults never grasped, that kindness could change lives, that love was not dependent on circumstances. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "We'll call it Grace's Place, after your Mommy. How does that sound?" Sophie threw her arms around his neck and Oliver joined the hug, declaring it the best idea ever. In that moment, standing in a cemetery on a sunny May afternoon, Marcus understood that sometimes the most unexpected blessings come from the darkest moments. Within 6 months, Grace's Place opened its doors in Brooklyn, not far from where Grace and Sophie had lived. It was a shelter specifically designed for children and single parents in crisis, offering not just beds and meals but counseling, job training, and educational support. Sophie insisted on being involved in every aspect, from choosing the bright colors for the walls to selecting the books for the library. She became the shelter's youngest ambassador, telling her story to donors and volunteers, her quiet strength inspiring everyone she met. Oliver appointed himself her protector and assistant, standing beside her at every event, ready with tissues when she got emotional and high fives when she finished speaking. The first Christmas after Sophie came into their lives was nothing like the lonely evening Marcus had spent the year before. The house was filled with laughter and chaos. Sophie and Oliver had convinced him to get a real tree, which they decorated with handmade ornaments and so many lights that Mrs. Chen worried about the electric bill. They baked cookies for Santa, even though both children were old enough to know the truth, because Sophie had never gotten to do it before. On Christmas Eve, instead of working late, Marcus was home by 5 o'clock. They ate dinner together, played board games, and then settled in the living room to watch Christmas movies. Sophie curled up against Marcus's side, Oliver on the other, and Buster sprawled across all their feet. "Daddy," Sophie said sleepily as the clock neared midnight, "I need to tell you something." Marcus looked down at her, smoothing her hair back from her face. "What is it, sweetheart?" She sat up, her expression serious. "Last Christmas Eve, when I was looking for you, I thought I was going to die. I was so cold, and I couldn't feel my feet anymore. But I kept thinking about what Mommy said, that you were a good man, that you would help me if you knew about me. And then you found me, right when I had given up hope. The security man had turned me away, told me to stop lying about being your daughter. I didn't know where else to go, so I hid by the dumpsters to get out of the wind. I thought maybe in the morning I could try again, but I was so tired." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "The truth is, Daddy, you didn't just save my life that night. You gave me a life, a real life with a family and love and a future. Mommy always said that angels come when we need them most, and I think you're my angel." Marcus pulled her close, his own eyes wet with tears. "No, Sophie," he said softly. "You're the angel. You brought love back into this house. You taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing each other, again and again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Oliver, never one to be left out of an emotional moment, wrapped his arms around both of them. "Group hug," he declared, and even Buster seemed to understand, climbing onto the couch to join them. As midnight struck and Christmas Day officially began, Marcus looked at his two children and felt a completeness he hadn't experienced since Rebecca's death. The family portrait on the mantel now included Sophie, her smile bright and genuine. The empty chair at the dinner table was filled. The silence that had once echoed through the house was replaced with laughter and arguments, and the beautiful chaos of childhood. But more than that, Marcus had learned something profound. Sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in tragedy. Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what really matters. And sometimes, a little girl sleeping on trash on Christmas Eve can teach a successful CEO that love is the only currency that truly matters. The following year brought more changes and challenges. Sophie started therapy to work through her trauma, and there were difficult days when the memories overwhelmed her. But with each passing month, the bad days became fewer and the good days multiplied. She discovered a love of music, just like her mother, and Marcus hired a piano teacher who came twice a week. The house filled with the sound of scales and eventually simple melodies that made everyone smile. Oliver joined the lessons, and soon the two were playing duets, their laughter mingling with the notes. Grace's place expanded to 3 locations, helping hundreds of families find stability and hope. Sophie spoke at fundraisers with increasing confidence, her story inspiring donations that kept the shelters running. On the 2nd anniversary of finding Sophie, Marcus took both children back to the alley where it all began. It had been Sophie's idea. She wanted to see the place in daylight, to face the memory without fear. They stood together, looking at the spot between the dumpsters where Sophie had made her bed of cardboard and newspaper. "It looks so small," Sophie said quietly. "I remember it feeling bigger, like a cave where I could hide." Oliver squeezed her hand. "You're the bravest person I know," he said simply. Sophie smiled at him, then looked up at Marcus. "Can we make sure no other kid ever has to sleep here?" she asked. Marcus nodded, already making plans in his mind. Within a month, he had installed heated emergency shelters throughout the city, small structures where anyone could find warmth and a phone to call for help. As the years passed, the story of the CEO who found his daughter on Christmas Eve became legend in their circles, but for the Chen family, it was simply their story, how they became whole. Sophie grew into a confident, compassionate young woman who combined her mother's artistic soul with her father's business acumen. She and Oliver remained close, their bond unbreakable despite their different paths. Oliver became a doctor, inspired by the team that had saved Sophie's life. Sophie studied social work and art therapy, determined to help other children who had experienced trauma. At her college graduation, Marcus stood in the audience with tears streaming down his face, remembering the tiny girl he'd found in an alley, barely alive and alone. In her valedictorian speech, Sophie told her story, more time, but with a perspective that only time could bring. I learned that families aren't always born. Sometimes they're discovered in the most unexpected places. Sometimes they're built from loss and found through love. My father once told me that he found me on Christmas Eve, but the truth is, we found each other. We saved each other. And in the end, that's what family does. We save each other, over and over again, in big ways and small, through every season of our lives. The audience erupted in applause, but Sophie's eyes were on Marcus, Oliver, and the photo of Grace she carried in her pocket. They were all there with her, the living and the dead, the family she was born into and the family she found. Years later, when Sophie had children of her own, she would tell them the story of their grandfather who found their mother on Christmas Eve, sleeping on trash, nearly frozen to death. She would tell them about their grandmother Grace, who loved fiercely and sacrificed everything. She would tell them about Uncle Oliver, who became her protector and best friend from the moment they met. But most importantly, she would tell them that love has the power to transform the most desperate circumstances into miracles. She would teach them that sometimes we have to be brave enough to search for the family we need, and sometimes we have to be open enough to recognize family when it finds us. Marcus, now a grandfather with silver hair and laugh lines earned through years of joy, would hold his grandchildren and remember that Christmas Eve when his life changed forever. He had built an empire of glass and steel, but his greatest achievement was the family built from a foundation of love, sacrifice, and second chances. The tall buildings he constructed would one day crumble, but the lives he touched through Grace's place, through his children, through the simple act of stopping when he heard a child's cough in an alley, those would ripple outward through generations. Every Christmas Eve, the Chen family would gather not just to celebrate the holiday, but to remember the night that brought them together. They would light a candle for Grace, tell stories of Sophie's bravery, and remind each other that miracles often come disguised as tragedies. The truth that had stunned Marcus that night, that he had a daughter he never knew existed, had become the truth that defined his life. That love multiplies when divided, that families are made not just by blood, but by choice, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come, wrapped in the most unlikely packages. Sophie had come to him seeking a father, but she had given him so much more. She had given him redemption, purpose, and a second chance at wholeness. She had taught him that success meant nothing without someone to share it with, that strength could be found in vulnerability, and that the courage of a 6-year-old girl could humble the most powerful of men. As the years turned to decades, Grace's place grew into a nationwide network of shelters and support centers. Sophie became its director, with Oliver serving on the board and Marcus as its primary benefactor. They never forgot their origins. a desperate child searching for her father, a grieving man who had lost his way, and a boy who needed his family to be complete again. They never forgot Grace, whose sacrifice had made it all possible, whose love had been strong enough to send her daughter into the cold with nothing but hope and a father's name. And they never forgot that Christmas Eve when everything changed. When a single-dad CEO found a little girl sleeping on trash and discovered that she was the missing piece of his heart he hadn't known was lost. In his final years, Marcus would often return to that alley, now transformed into a small park with a playground and a memorial plaque that read, "In memory of Grace Lynn and all the invisible angels who sacrifice in silence. In honor of Sophie Chen, who taught us that courage comes in all sizes. This space is dedicated to every lost child searching for home. May you always find your way to love." He would sit on the bench and watch children play, their laughter rising into the sky like prayers of gratitude. He would think about the twists of fate, the moments of choice, the power of compassion to change everything. And he would whisper, a thank you to Grace, to the universe, to whatever force had guided Sophie to his building that night. Single Dad CEO found a little girl, sleeping on trash on Christmas Eve. The truth left him stunned. And that truth had transformed not just his life, but the lives of thousands of children who would find hope in their darkest hours. Because Sophie had been right all along. Everyone deserves to be loved, and sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected places, turning our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths, our losses into our most profound gains. The girl who had slept on trash became a beacon of hope, and the CEO who had everything learned that he had nothing until he found his daughter. Their story, born from tragedy and sealed with love, would echo through generations, a testament to the power of family, the strength of the human spirit, and the miracles that await when we have the courage to stop, to look, to see the angels hidden in the shadows of our everyday lives.